By the end of January, there were 2 cabins standing on her land. Only one of them had ever been built. The second one was growing around the first, post by post, board by board, packed tight with dry grass, as if she were trying to bury her own house alive. No one understood why. Not until the temperature dropped below 30, and hers was the only door still opening to warmth. The first time Eliza Voss noticed something was wrong, it was quiet. Not a storm, not wind. Just a still night in early December, the kind that makes everything feel locked in place. The stove was burning steady. The wood was good. She had done everything the way it was supposed to be done. And still, the cold crept in. She sat at the small table near the north wall, watching her breath drift in front of her face. Inside the cabin, she reached out and placed her hand flat against the log. It felt alive, not warm, not even neutral. Cold, moving, like something on the other side was pressing through, inch by inch, finding every weakness in the wood. She kept her hand there longer than she should have, feeling it, measuring it. Then she stood up, walked to the stove, and added another log. The flames rose, the iron ticked, the room brightened, and nothing changed. That was the moment the thought came to her. Not sudden, not loud, just clear. The fire isn't failing. The house is. Outside, the Powder River country lay still under snow. Miles of open basin. No trees tall enough to break the wind. No neighbors close enough to hear a call in the night. Jonas Voss had known that when he claimed the land. He had said the openness was a kind of freedom. In April, it became something else. The bank gave way beneath him without warning. One step too close to the cut, and the river took him. Eliza found him where the water slowed, caught against a bend of frozen reeds. She did not scream. She did not run. She stood there until the current carried the last of the movement away. There was no one within miles. So she dug the ground herself. Spring soil, soft enough to break, deep enough to hold. She placed him above the river, where the grass would come back first, and when it was done, she went back to the cabin, because the land did not change, and neither did winter. By September, people had already made up their minds for her. Amos Bell rode in from the east and stood at her fence. Get through another winter out here alone. He didn't say it cruelly. He said it like a man stating weather, like something already decided. A week later, Silas Creed came with an offer folded in his coat pocket. Enough money for a house in town, warm walls, close neighbors, a life that did not depend on one stove and one woman. Eliza listened. She nodded. She thanked him, and she did not answer. Instead, she walked the perimeter of her cabin, slowly, not looking at it the way she used to, not as shelter, as a problem. She measured the distance from wall to open ground, counted steps, marked corners with small stones. Then she stood at the north side, where the wind came first every winter. She pressed her hand against the logs again. Even in September, there was a trace of cold there. That was when she began to see it. Not clearly, not all at once, but enough. The walls were too thin for this land. Not broken, not weak, just not built to hold what mattered. She turned, looked out across the empty basin, and made a decision she would not explain to anyone. If the house could not keep the warmth in, she would build something that could. Not inside, outside, around it. Through October, she cut posts from the draw where the ground dipped low enough for trees to grow. Dragged them back one by one. Shoulder to wood, boots grinding into frost. She split boards with a spring saw that kicked and jerked with every pull. Measured them. Stacked them. Numbered them. Everything had its place. She gathered grass from the basin. Long, dry strands of buffalo grass that bent without breaking. She packed it in her hands, testing how it held air between the fibers. Not loose. Not soft. Dense. Still. At night, she wrote in a small notebook by firelight. Distances. Depths. Spacing. How far the second wall should stand from the first. How thick the cavity needed to be on each side. More on the north. Less on the east. Deepest where the wind would strike. She planned for every angle the cold could take. And when she was finished, everything was ready. The posts were cut. The boards were stacked. The grass was dry. The tools were laid beside the door. Waiting. Only one thing remained beyond her control. The ground. It would not yield in winter. Not under iron. Not under force. Unless the temperature changed. Briefly. She had seen it before. Once a year, sometimes. A warm breath from the southwest. Strong enough to loosen the earth. For a few hours. No more. Through December. As the cold tightened. As the cabin creaked in the night. As the walls gave back less warmth than they took. She burned wood. Watched the piles shrink. Measured the temperature. And felt the house losing. On the coldest night of the month, she unfolded Silas Creed's offer again. Held it in both hands. Read the number. A way out. Warmth without risk. She looked at it for a long time. Then she set it face down on the table. Outside, the posts waited. The boards waited. The grass waited. So did she. Because somewhere in that frozen land, there would come a single day when the ground would let her begin. And if she missed it, winter would finish what it had already started. By the time January came, the valley had stopped pretending. There was no softness left in the land, no margin, only cold that held, and cold that deepened. Eliza Voss woke before first light most mornings, not because she was rested, because the cold would not let her sleep. The fire would burn low toward dawn, and the cabin would answer it. Wood ticking, air tightening, frost creeping along the inside of the wall, she learned to read it, not with her eyes, with her skin. Which wall was losing heat first, which corner held it longer, where the wind pressed hardest, even when it made no sound. The north side was always the worst. It didn't shout, it didn't rattle, it stole. She would sit there sometimes, just before dawn, with her back to the stove, and her hand against that wall, measuring, waiting. Every night it told her the same thing, not enough. Outside, the basin stretched empty and white, no tracks, no movement. Even Amos Bell had stopped riding out as often. The cold made distance longer, and risk heavier. But he still came once, in the second week of January. His horse moved slow through the snow, head low, breath thick. He tied off at her corral and knocked once before stepping inside. The cold came in with him. He didn't take off his coat, didn't take off his gloves, just stood there, looking around the cabin. At the stove, at the wood box, at the walls.
"You're burning too much wood." She didn't answer. She already knew. He stepped closer to the north wall, pressed his hand against it, pulled it back almost immediately. Cold. He looked at her then, not unkind, just certain. "You can still leave before it gets worse." Eliza shook her head once. "I'm not leaving." He let out a slow breath, looked toward the door, toward the open land beyond it, then back at her. "Then you better hope for a thaw." He didn't stay long after that. The cold pushed him out as much as the silence did. When the door closed behind him, the cabin felt smaller, not in size, in time. She walked to the table, opened her notebook, and ran her finger down the columns she had drawn weeks before. Post spacing, wall distance, cavity depth, north, deeper, west, deepest, south, moderate, east, minimal. Every line had been thought through, every measurement tested in her mind. There would be no second attempt. If the ground opened, she had to be ready to move without thinking. That night, she made one final addition.
She took a strip of blue wool, cut from an old scarf, and tied it to the corral post outside the door. In the morning, she would hang it. At night, she would take it down. A signal. If the cloth stayed up after dark, something had gone wrong. Amos would see it from his ridge. Not quickly. Not in time to save a mistake. But in time to find her. It was not fear that made her do it. It was planning. She would not gamble with the one day she was waiting for. The next morning, she stepped outside before sunrise. The air cut sharp against her face. No softness. No change. She checked the ground with the tip of the iron. Solid. She nodded once, went back inside, and waited. Days passed like that. Cold, stillness, measurement. The woodpile dropped slower now. Not because she used less. Because she watched it, counted it, guarded it. Each night, she placed one more log on the fire and listened to how long the warmth held. Each morning, she checked the thermometer by the window. Numbers that did not change enough. Not yet. On the 14th day, something shifted. Not in the sky, not in the light. In the air. She stepped outside and stopped, listening. There was no wind, but the cold was loosening. Not gone, not even weak, just different. She walked to the ground beside the cabin, drove the iron down. It went in, 2 inches. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Then she pulled it free, lifted it higher, and drove it down again. 4 inches. That was all she needed to know. It had begun. She turned, walked back to the door, and stood there for a moment, looking at everything she had prepared. The posts stacked along the fence, the boards laid in order, the grass packed dry under cover. Months of work, waiting for this. She reached for the blue cloth and tied it to the corral post. Carefully. Then she lifted the iron tool from beside the door. Heavy. Familiar. The sky above was still pale. The sun not yet over the ridge. She stepped into the snow, walked to the north side of the cabin, and raised the iron. There would be no second day, only this one. And it had already begun. The first strike sounded wrong. Not because the iron missed, not because the ground held, because it answered. A dull, heavy sound, not frozen. Yielding. Eliza drove the iron down again, harder, deeper. 4 inches became 6, 6 became 8. The crust was breaking, but slowly. Too slowly. She adjusted her stance, set her boots wider in the snow, and lifted the iron higher over her shoulder. Then brought it down with everything she had. Again. 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 The rhythm came quickly. Lift, strike, turn. Lift, strike, turn. The world narrowed to that motion. Nothing else existed. By the time the first hole reached 12 inches, her shoulders were already burning. At 18, the resistance changed. Soft, below the frost line, the earth gave way like it remembered spring. She drove the iron down once more, then stepped back. Kneeling, she cleared the hole with her hands and the spade. Snow, hard soil, looser earth beneath. She measured the depth with the handle. Enough. The first post went in clean. She lowered it carefully, held it straight, and packed the soil back tight around it. Firm, unmoving. Eliza stepped back and looked at it. 36 to go. She didn't let herself think beyond that. Only the next hole. 2 feet to the east, she drove the iron down again. The crust was thinner now, the work faster. The rhythm returned. Lift, strike, turn. Clear, set, tamp. By the 4th hole, her breath was steady again. By the 6th, her hands had stopped shaking. By the 8th, she stopped feeling the cold. The sun climbed slowly behind her, casting long light across the snow. Time moved with it, faster than she wanted. She did not stop to eat, did not stop to sit. Only once, she reached for the canteen hanging from the fence, took a long drink, and went back to work. At the 10th hole, the iron struck something solid, sharp. The shock ran up her arms, into her shoulders. She froze, waited. Then drove it down again. Same place. Stone. She exhaled slowly, stepped back, and shifted the mark a few inches east. Lift, strike. This time, the ground gave. Good. No frustration. No wasted motion. She had planned for this. Every problem had a place in her thinking. By midday, the south side was taking shape. Posts rising in a line, evenly spaced, 6 to 9 inches from the cabin wall. A frame, the beginning of something larger than it looked. 17 posts stood by the time the sun reached its highest point. She paused then, just for a moment, not to rest, to look, to measure what remained. North, east, west, 20 left. The north side would be the hardest. It had stayed in shadow all morning. The frost ran deeper there. She walked around the cabin, iron in hand, and set her mark. The first strike told her everything. Harder. The crust held longer, resisted deeper. Each inch cost more. Each lift heavier than the last. She adjusted without thinking. Shorter holes. Less depth. More bracing later. The structure would hold if it tied back to the frame. She had written that in November. Now she trusted it. Time was slipping, and she could feel it. Not in the sky. In her arms. The iron felt heavier now. The lift slower. The strike less clean. She forced the rhythm back. Lift, strike, turn, clear, set, tamp. By mid-afternoon, the north side stood, not as deep, but enough. She didn't check the depth again, didn't second-guess it. There was no time for doubt, only completion. The east side came easier, the ground softer, the work faster. Her rhythm returned, but the light had begun to change. The sun sliding lower toward the ridge. A warning. She did not look at it again. She looked at the gaps. Post by post, she closed them. The world reduced to distance. 2 feet. Strike. Set. 2 feet. Strike. Set. By the time she reached the west side, her arms were trembling. Not from fear. From use. This was the wind wall. The side that had taken everything from her. Night after night. This side had to stand. She drove the iron down. And the ground answered slower. Heavier. The frost returning. She didn't think about it. Didn't allow it. Just worked faster. Each strike now cost her. Each lift demanded more than she had left. But she gave it. Again. 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 The final hole came late. The light thinning. The air tightening again. She drove the iron down one last time. Cleared the earth. And lowered the post into place. 37. She packed the soil tight around it. Pressed it firm. Then stood up slowly. For a moment. She didn't move. Didn't think. She turned. And looked at what stood around her. Posts. Even. Solid. Forming around the first. Months of work. Held in one day. And the day was ending. She walked back to the door. Each step heavier than the last. Inside, the fire was still burning. She sat down at the table, hands resting flat against the wood. Empty. She ate what had been left from morning, did not taste it. Her arms felt distant now. Heavy in a way that reached deeper than muscle. Spent. She lay down fully dressed, did not bother removing her boots. Sleep came fast. Sometime in the night, she woke, not to a sound, to a feeling. The air had changed again. Tightening. She rose, walked to the window, and checked the thermometer. Falling. Fast. The thaw was gone. By morning, the ground would be iron again. She stepped outside before first light. The cold cut sharper now, cleaner. The basin held its breath again. She walked to the nearest post, placed her gloved hand against it, and pressed. Solid. She moved to the next, and the next. All of them held. The earth had closed, but it had not taken them back. Eliza stood there, in the returning cold, surrounded by the frame she had forced into the ground in a single day. She nodded once. Good, then she turned back toward the cabin, because the real work was only just beginning. The cold came back hard. Not slowly, not gently, it closed. By the second morning, the ground was iron again, the air sharp enough to cut breath short in the chest. Eliza stepped outside before sunrise, looked at the line of posts around her cabin, and knew something simple. They would not move again. Whatever she built now, would have to be built in that cold. No more help from the land, only resistance. She carried the first rail out from the stack. Rough pine, heavy, set it across 2 posts, held it in place with one shoulder, and reached for the hammer. She pulled off her mitten. 2 strikes. The metal burned her palm like ice. She dropped the hammer, forced her hand back into the mitten, and pressed it under her arm. Waited. Then did it again. 2 strikes. Mittens on. Breathe into her hands. 2 strikes. Mittens on. The rhythm was different now. Slower. Measured. Pain counted in pairs. By mid-morning, the first side was framed. Rails fixed between the posts. A skeleton taking shape. The wind found it immediately. Pushed through the open frame. As if testing it. As if looking for a way in. Eliza did not answer it. She lifted the first board, set it against the outer frame. Nailed it in place. Then the second. Then the third. Each one overlapping slightly. Each one closing the gap. And behind them, she began to pack. Dry grass. Buffalo grass. Stripped and stored months before. She pushed it into the cavity between the old wall and the new. Not loose. Not soft. Tight. She used a flat wooden paddle, carved for this purpose. Pressed the grass down, again, until it resisted. Until it held its shape. Until the air inside it could not move. The first section filled. She stepped back. Listened. The wind hit the outer boards. Stopped. Did not pass through. She turned, and went on. No pause. The cold fought her every step. Nails stiff in her fingers. Wood splitting if struck wrong. Grass freezing at the edges if left exposed too long. She adjusted. Always adjusting. Short bursts of work. 2 boards. Step back. Warm hands. 2 boards. Pack. Press. The south wall rose first. Easier ground. Less wind. Forgiving. On the 4th day, she stopped. Not because she was tired. Because something felt different. She stepped inside the cabin. Closed the door behind her. Walked to the south wall, and placed her hand against the logs. Not stove hot. Not burning. Held. She stood there, hand against the wall, not moving. Then she crossed the room, placed her other hand on the north wall. Cold. She stood between them, one hand in warmth, one in cold. The difference moved through her body. Not theory, not hope. Proof. She turned back to the door, went outside, and worked faster. The north wall came next, the hardest, the one that had taken the most from her. The wind struck it full, day and night. She set the cavity deeper there, packed more grass, pressed harder. Again. 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 Her shoulders shook under the effort. Her breath came shorter. But she did not stop. Could not. On the 3rd day of the north wall, the sky changed. Not dark, not storm, just a shift. The kind that comes before something heavier. By afternoon, the wind rose. Low at first, then steady, then driving. Snow lifted from the ground, carried sideways, blinding. Eliza stood in it, one side of the wall still open. Boards half set, grass exposed. If she left it, the wind would take everything. She moved without thinking. Board up, 2 nails. Mittens on. Next board, pack. Press. Faster. The wind tore at her coat, pulled at the loose grass. She leaned into it, used her body to shield the opening, forced the material in. Snow built along the frame, clung to the boards, trying to take hold before she could seal it. Her hands burned, then went numb. She stopped feeling them. Worked anyway. 1 more board. 1 more. 1 more. until finally, the last gap closed. The outer wall sealed. She stepped back, stumbling slightly, caught herself against a post. The wind hit the finished section, and broke. Not stopped, not silenced, but changed, deflected. She stood there in the blowing snow, watching it, then turned and went inside. The door closed behind her. The sound of the wind dropped. Not gone, but distant. She walked to the north wall, placed her hand against it. Warm, steady, no movement, no breath of cold pushing through. She stayed there, hand against the wall, eyes closed, listening. The storm went on outside. The wind kept moving across the basin, unchanged. But inside, something had shifted. Not the fire, not the air, the boundary. The first time that winter, the house did not answer the cold. It held. Eliza opened her eyes, looked around the room, and saw it differently. Not as something failing, something working. She moved to the table, checked the thermometer by the window. Higher, not by chance. She nodded once. Good. Then she turned back toward the door. Because one wall holding was not enough. She still had the rest to finish. And winter was not done with her yet. By the time March came, the wind had not changed. It still crossed the basin the same way, low, endless, unforgiving. But the cabin did. Eliza stood just inside the door one morning, hand resting lightly against the north wall. She waited. Not for warmth to come, for it to leave. It didn't. The heat held where it was, steady, contained. She crossed the room slowly, checked the thermometer by the window. 61. Outside, the air cut below zero. She looked at the stove. Same fire, same wood. But the room no longer answered the cold. It kept its own. She walked to the wood box, opened the lid. Still full. Not untouched, but far from empty. She closed it again, resting her hand on the rough lid. This was the difference. Not comfort. Time. Time bought back from the winter. Time she would not spend cutting what she no longer needed. Time she would keep. Outside, the last wall stood finished. 4 sides. Posts set deep in frozen earth. Boards fixed tight. Grass packed dense between them. A second skin. Eliza stepped out into the morning light. Walked the perimeter of the cabin slowly. Not inspecting. Confirming. She pressed her hand to the outer boards. Cold. Then stepped inside again, and pressed her hand to the inner logs. Warm. She stood there between the two, and understood it completely. The cold had not been beaten. It had been kept out. A few days later, Amos Bell came again. His horse slower now, winter-worn. He tied off at the corral, noticed the blue cloth missing from the post. A good sign. He knocked once, and stepped inside. The change hit him immediately. He stopped. Not from surprise, from instinct. His shoulders eased, his hands loosened at his sides, and without thinking, he pulled off his gloves. He had never done that in her cabin in winter. He looked at the stove, then at the wood box, then at the thermometer. 60, he said quietly. Eliza nodded once. Close enough. He walked to the wall. pressed his hand against it, held it there, then stepped outside. She followed. He ran his hand along the outer boards, knocked once, solid. At the top edge, where the cavity was still visible, he reached in slightly, pressed against the packed grass. It did not give. "What is it?" he asked. "Grass," she said. He nodded slowly, looked back at the wall. "Air," he said. She didn't answer. He took a step back, studied the whole structure. Posts, boards, distance from the original wall, measuring it in his mind. Then he looked at her. "You built this alone?" "Yes." He held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded. "I'll build mine next." He didn't say anything else, didn't need to. The proof stood between them. Later that week, Silas Creed rode in. He slowed before the gate, looking at the cabin from a distance. It didn't look the same anymore. Wider, heavier, finished. He dismounted, walked to the door, and knocked. When Eliza opened it, the warmth met him, immediate. He stepped inside, took off his hat, and stood still. His eyes moved slowly. Stove, walls, wood box, thermometer. Understanding came without words. It was all there. "You changed it," he said. "Yes." He turned once in place, looked at the walls again, then back at her. "I suppose you won't be needing my offer." Eliza walked to the table, picked up the folded paper, held it for a moment, then handed it back to him. "Thank you for the flower." He took it, didn't unfold it. Instead, he studied her. Not as someone waiting, as someone who had stayed. "You chose right," he said. She didn't answer. He nodded once, turned, and stepped back out into the cold. Mounted his horse, and rode away across the basin. Eliza stood in the doorway, watching until he disappeared over the rise. The wind moved the same as it always had. Nothing out there had changed. She closed the door. The sound of it settled into the room. Warm. She walked to the stove, added a single log, not because she needed it, because she could. Then she sat by the window, sunlight falling across the floor, the season turning, slowly. She opened her notebook, turned to the last page, read the numbers again. Before the wall, after the wall. She did not write anything new. There was nothing left to prove. After a moment, she closed it, rested her hand once more against the north wall. Warm. Outside, winter still held the land, still moved across it, still tested it. But when it came to her door now, it did not come inside. And when it returned the next year, it would find the same thing waiting. A cabin that no longer answered the cold, and a woman who no longer feared it.